Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama. The Professor. I stand alone in my office, staring thoughtfully at my desk in the way we scholars often do when we're contemplating matters of extreme academic importance, irrelevance, or perhaps acts of violence. In this particular case, the matter of extreme academic importance was whether I should take a 13th century bastard sword home with me. I know. It's not an everyday thinking thought. The office itself had the dignified clutter of a man who'd spent most of his life acquiring knowledge and very little time acquiring storage solutions. My books lay in carefully unstable towers. Scroll tubes leaned against filing cabinets like retired soldiers. A framed medieval manuscript hung crookedly above a shelf that held a surprising number of labelled jars containing substances that had once been necessary in the exorcism of extremely inconvenient entities. I'd have to think seriously about what I was going to do when that jar of kobold scrotums ran out. I'd assigned someone who was currently in my literal bad book to do that horrendous scrotal retrieval assignment. Blech. I smiled at this thought as I opened my much-loved ancient leather satchel. It was a large, much-loved ancient leather satchel. A much-loved ancient leather satchel that had once belonged to an antiquarian in the 1890s and had since developed the quiet authority of an object that had been present for many decades of extremely strange conversations. I began packing it. First came the reports. Notebooks filled with my meticulous handwriting. Handwritten one-offs for security. Sort of. No copies. But also handwritten because cursive has so much more meaning and power than typed text. The reports held cross-referenced observations. Several documents concerned the non-regrettable but scientifically interesting death of Nietzsche earlier that afternoon. They would be burnt when this particular world-saving operation was done. I smiled at this. If the operation succeeded or failed, they would still be burnt. If it went well, it would be in my manor's furnace. If it went badly, they would be burnt in, in hell fire, as the demon realm would flood the earthly plane. That was to be avoided. I comforted myself for a moment with a reflexive scratch of the back of my neck as I thought about that and laughed as I slid them neatly inside. Gallows humour. Destroyable documentation, I muttered to myself. The cornerstone of responsible covert operations, always has been. Next came the grimoires. I selected two. The first was a carefully preserved Latin transcription of the Ars Goetia, annotated heavily in my own hand. The second was a slimmer volume, bound and cracked in brown leather, with the deeply worrying habit of occasionally changing page numbers when left unopened. I hesitated. I weighed both in my hands, trying to decide on which had the most gravity for the evening's work. I smirked and placed both inside the satchel. Preparation, I said quietly. It's the cornerstone of survival. A Wing Commander Monty quote, right there in his distinctive pentameter and accent. I closed one drawer and opened another. Inside sat a white paper bag with its own great gravity, bearing Waitrose' elegant green logo. I regarded it with a certain scholarly satisfaction. Earlier that afternoon, I'd received a small delivery from Fortnum & Mason, a modern grocer that, in my professional opinion, represented one of the few remaining pillars of civilization in modern Britain. I removed the cheeses with a care normally reserved for sacred relics. A wedge of aged Comté, a small round of goat's cheese, a Stilton whose aroma suggested that it might itself qualify as a minor supernatural entity, a boulder of brie. "These," I said to the empty room, "are essential." They would be served with a very fine bottle of port, only the best I still had, for Lucifer. Ingratiation with her would always be a priority for one of the damned, such as myself. Tonight it would be the Giuseppe Quintarelli, 2012 Alzero Cabernet Magnum. Not the best vintage I've ever owned, or had the audacity to drink. That vintage was the 1854 from the same maker. No creator in the case of that port. I'd drunk it 3 times in my lives. In my time. Sadly, the last time I managed a tot or two was in a rude rush in 1912 on board the Titanic, just before it was lost to that devastating ice kraken attack. Ha! The ship we were told was unsinkable. Well, apparently not so. It bloody sank. Not good. For reputations. But I suppose not good for those aboard most of all. Good did come of it, though. Great film. Cracking acting. Oh, and the attacking sea monster was cowed by the release of Poseidon's vengeance. It hadn't been active for a century now. Sadly, the port, like most of the passengers, but unlike the monster, could and would never be again. Tragedy is commonplace. The loss of the Titanic was an obvious tragedy. I mean, technically, a much bigger disaster than the port, although the loss of the port was an utter tragedy in its own right. I packed the required cheeses gently between the grimoires. Experience had taught me that demonological text and cheese could coexist peacefully, provided one inserted a respectable quantity of parchment between them. I didn't want the brie infused with demonic energies. It tended to give me the most utterly horrendous indigestion. I paused and added a pack of thrice-blessed antacid tablets, just in case. Once happy with my cheese stowage, I closed the satchel. Something wasn't right. A nagging annoyance pinged my pespsis and paranoia. Something was wrong. I stood very still. I closed my eyes to focus on what I was hearing. The room was quiet. I know in most stories it would say too quiet at this point, but that was not the case. The radiator clicked softly. Outside, a group of people laughed loudly about something I strongly suspected involved a ticky-tock. I allowed my mind to wander. The port and cheese were not enough to subjugate my worries. Lucifer was coming to my home. Will the werewolf would be there. Monty too. And Will, bloody Will, I reflected grimly, was planning to fight with the Astaroth. I opened my eyes. Very slowly, my gaze drifted to the wastebasket on my desk. Standing in it was my comfort item. You know, one of those things you feel content and comfortable with when it's close and within one's grasp. Normally something like a soft toy or a childhood blanket. In my case, it was something other. It was not normally a necessary item to quell my paranoia. I can usually do that with a rational thought. But in this case, I felt it was required. It was a bastard sword. The sword and scabbard were nearly 4 feet long. Original steel. Blue steel in this light, I could imagine it, with not a rust pit on its well-oiled length. The brass crossguard was simple but elegant, worn smooth by centuries of handling. The grip was wrapped in dark leather that had been replaced many times across the century or so, yet somehow remembered every time it had been held. I'd acquired this particular blade in 1893, and I had used it a few times in anger. Those times had been utterly educational and utterly thrilling. I stared at it. If my mind was telling me to take it, then the deeper part of me was concerned. I looked back down at my satchel. "No," I said firmly to it, and closed the bag's flap. "This is utterly ridiculous thinking." I put on my overcoat, I picked up the satchel, swinging it across my shoulder, and walked towards the door. Halfway there, I stopped. I turned on my heel, and I sighed. "You are a professor of, well, negotiable reality, I suppose," I said to the uncaring world. "You are a rational man, dealing with the non-rational. You do not solve rational problems by introducing medieval weaponry into domestic environments, for God's sake." I nodded once, in the knowledge that this was indeed correct thinking. Then my inner voice relayed Will's introduction of chaos. An introduction to the irritating irrational. I closed my eyes in a moment of contemplative contention. "Yes," I said slowly. "All right. In that case." I walked back to the sword. Another internal debate beginning. It wasn't a particularly balanced debate, though, I can tell you. Argument 1, taking this sword home was irrational. Argument 2, when I arrived there, the devil, Lucifer, would be waiting for me. Well, I had to consider this, but to be honest, this sword would do nothing to her. Argument 3, one should trust in the wards I have set, in the knowledge I have, and in the reasoning. Argument 4, bugger that, Will existed. I mean, if I used this sword on Will, it would just inconvenience him a little before he killed me. Again. But it was a comforter. And I pulled the simple leather scabbard that housed my bastard blade from its unworthy home. The blade slid free with a soft metallic whisper that seemed faintly pleased to be involved. I held it for a moment. Despite my academic career, the motion was a natural one in birthing the blade from its home. Old instincts stirred in my centuries-toned muscles. A millennium of experiences I rarely discussed with colleagues resurfaced briefly like old ghosts stretching their legs. "Yes," I said thoughtfully. The sword felt balanced, reliable, reassuring. I looked around the office. "Purely precautionary," I told the watching books from their shelves. I slid the sword back into its scabbard, and then carefully into a long canvas rifle case that hung from my coat stand. I smiled at its comforting weight as I lifted it, but paused at the door and glanced around the office once more. The quiet room, the old books, stacks of notes, I checked the important things I needed. Cheese, I said softly, tapping the satchel. Sword, I added, adjusting the case. I considered the evening ahead. Let's see. Monty, Will, and Lucifer. A discussion about fighting Astaroth. I switched off the light with a casual flick of the switch. Good heavens, I muttered, then locked the door and headed. Wait. Something. Oh dear me, what a foolish, forgetful man I can be. I returned to the door, unlocked it, and went into the office and opened the top drawer of my desk. There it was, the old tobacco tin that held the little trinkets that it could, but perhaps should not. I opened it to get the ring of summoning. We should be able to use it in the fight, and probably come in quite handy. I smiled. The lid popped and... Strange. A tiny note sat on the box's contents of Supernatural Drunk. It was an A4 sheet that had been folded 13 times. Excessive folding was my first thought before I remembered the physical limits when folding paper. A standard A4 sheet at 80 grams per square meter can only be folded 7 times, a point after which the thickness of the folded mass renders further folding simply an impossibility. This was folded fully 13 times, and that cannot happen naturally. Unsurprisingly, my suspicions were aroused that magic might have been employed here, and that furthermore, whoever did this knew I would have recognized such a fact and did it purely to spite me. I opened the block up and read the scrawl. The words echoed through my consciousness in an accent that spoke of cold hillsides and the north of England. Dear Simon de Montfort, thanks very much. Love and hugs from Belfast as the unclaimed. P.S. I fucking hate you, you bastard. What? What? Oh, no. No, this can't be. My adrenaline spiked. I scattered the tin's contents onto the desk, knowing full well that the ring was gone, and I cast aside both tin and lid casually. I turned my hands and eyes to the small mix of items. Silver needle, Rathor's Dundinin, evil eye of Ventan, Rasputin's toothpick, but no ring. No fucking ring. I dropped to my knees, hands diving into the pile of the rug. I swept them back and forth. Nothing. I recovered both the lid and the tin, shaking them before sweeping my finger around their interiors. It was gone. Oh, shit. I calmed a little and sat cross-legged on the ground. Oh, fuck. Breathe. Just breathe, Simon. Control slowly reintegrated itself into this unfortunate moment. God damn that infernal man! Why couldn't he just stay dead when I had him killed? I bellowed into the impassive room, and then laughed out loud at the ridiculous irony of what I'd just said. After a moment or three, I reached for the note on the desk and read it again. But this time, I did not react. This time, I considered.
Ah, it is I, the Wing Commander. I've always believed that a man can learn a great deal about the nature of the world by observing a public house. Not the good sort of public house, God no. Anyone can appear civilized in a well-run establishment with polished wood, a decent cellar, and a bartender who understands the moral importance of proper glassware. No. If one wishes to understand humanity, one must go to a place like this godforsaken Wetherspoons places. Which is why I was here, I think. Well, maybe not precisely why I found myself leaning against the bar that evening, contemplating the slow collapse of Western civilization via patterned carpet and discounted lager. Not that I drink bloody lager, no. Taylor's landlord for me, moi, for hick. The carpet, the bits one could see beneath the stains of, things I should mention but don't wish to. Well, that carpet looked as though it had been designed by a man who had suffered a catastrophic sort of head trauma and attempted to reproduce the experience in textile form with the vomit and blood of the following years added to its commitment to hurt one mentally. I mean, I didn't fit in a place like this, as you can imagine. Will meanwhile appeared entirely at home, although I felt that he would have felt at home anywhere. One would assume this chap would fit in anywhere his giant wolf soul Fen was, and Fen did fit, bizarrely. Fen, you know, the gigantic wolf soul, it lay near us on the carpet, invisible to the denizens of this pit of iniquity. Perhaps that was wrong when surveying the clientele of this. I mean, they may not be humans. This was a horror show. I could not be sure if all of the things here were people. I actively hoped that some of them weren't, to be honest, looking at them. So maybe some of them could see the wolf soul. Anyway, whatever was thingy, you know, it was just yes. What does it say? Oh, Monty, you should have eaten before those 2 pints in the, 4, 5, 6, double whiskies. Anyway, what have we established? We've established that Will felt at home. Those humans and, other creatures that surrounded us felt he was here too. He was here too. He was here too. I don't know what he was here to do. Blow their bloody house down. What? Get it? Big bad wolf? Blow the house down and all that? The Three Little Pigs, man. The famous fairy tale thingamy. Well, the people in here let him be, for whatever reason they did so. That did not actually reassure me. The werewolf had consumed a quantity of alcohol that would have rendered a normal man either unconscious or convinced he could defeat a street lamp in single combat. Will, however, merely seemed pleasantly relaxed. He was currently smiling into his 8th pint of draft bass. The chaps in the commissary call it daft bass because it is very easy on the old palate, yet contains an exceedingly large sort of alcohol content. As you may concur, a dangerous combination in a beer. I was tipsy and attempting to understand him. Do you know, old chap? I said, swirling what remained of my whiskey. I've been trying to fathom how your mind does that thing, what it does. You know, what's it? How it sort of works. Will brightened immediately. Oh, that's pretty easy, he said. It mostly works when it hurts things. I considered that. I considered it for some time. Right, I sighed. I tried to structure my next thought through a whiskey-induced haze. Yes, I've noticed that tendency. I took another sip of the bloody delightful Islay malt. I deeply approved of the stuff. Bloody reasonable price as well. Well, the truth is, throughout my career, I've killed a great many individuals. Will smiled but did not engage. Some were chaps, and infrequently some were chapesses, some women. Humans, well, not all of them, no, but some certainly decidedly not human. It is not something a decent fellow boasts about, but It's just a fact of service. Just that. Service. Hick. However, I've always believed that such things must be done for, a bloody good reason. For king and country and all that tosh. Law and morality and that. Will raised his glass approvingly. Good lad, he said with his proffered cheers. I don't think you're understanding the gist of my words and thingy, I told him. I hope I have only done the killing and harming for the ultimate protection of others. Will blinked at me. I'm sorry you've had to do the killing and harming, he offered. A pause, a sip. For those reasons, he said politely and genuinely. That sounds both boring and somewhat exhausting. Els beamed. Him imitating me irritated me. I stared at him. I was trying to process this to find the deep nugget of truth of him that must be the seed of this statement. What? I asked. Exhausting and boring, he repeated, whilst taking a sip of his pint and bloody dropping a double measure of too fine a single malt to be downed in a wanner. I accepted the waste of the whiskey, but the bounder would not have me refill his now empty glass if he was going to treat it in that manner. Exhausting and boring. I wondered at this. Why? I asked him. Well, all that. Thinking, he explained. Making decisions on who deserves protecting and who deserves murdering. He waved his hand vaguely. It's a very complicated system. You don't consider such things? I asked him. He looked like he was in deep thought for a moment. No. The answer was delivered with the casual certainty of a man explaining that he preferred tea to coffee. Then why on earth, I asked carefully, do you do what you do then, old chap? I was genuinely intrigued, to which Will looked genuinely puzzled. He was reflecting. A simple shrug. Because it's fun. He ordered 2 more doubles of the whiskey, which were delivered to each of us as I thought. Behind us, someone dropped a glass. A food machine began playing a tune that sounded like a robot attempting to fart through a kazoo. I blinked away the lack of reality. You kill people for fun? I asked. No, he quickly replied. You see, you don't just kill people for fun, really. I smiled, raising my glass to him. Point 1. No, I do kill people for fun. The point that you missed was that I don't only kill people for fun. I kill... He rinsed a little of his beer around his mouth. People and non-people, if that's a thing, for fun. He lifted a whiskey tumbler and necked the double in one go. But you're paid for it, old chap, I told him. Will grinned. I know, that's the fucking best part. A broad, predatory smile cracked his face. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. I always repeat, past exploits at moments like this to know I have dealt with, hopefully, worse things. I have faced enemy aircraft over hostile territory. I have walked into rooms containing things that had been dead for centuries and yet still moved, but none of those experiences had prepared me for this, the moral reasoning of a werewolf in a somewhat budget pub. I find that difficult to comprehend, I admitted, downing my own whiskey in a one and slamming the empty tumbler on the bar. Another 2, my dear, I ordered. Will tilted his head. Difficult to comprehend. Really? A question mark readable on the man's face. Guess what? Killing should be all about duty, I said firmly. About doing what must be done for the greater good, I continued. Will stared at me for several seconds, and then he laughed. Oh, Monty, he said warmly. You are adorable. Fenrir chuckled from the floor. I heard him inside my skull. I decided it was time to address something that had been troubling me for somewhat of a while. The family in the Cotswolds, dear chap, I said quietly while folding my arms on the bar. The family we had to clear up after you, you know. Will's smile did not change. I rolled one of the empty glasses around in my hands. You tortured them for several hours. Nothing. No response, just nothing. Then I began to get a little concerned that I'd pushed him too far. Then Will just shrugged. Did I? Pause. You tortured and killed bloody children. He nodded thoughtfully. Oh yeah, that sounds familiar. You killed the bloody mother. I now took a seat at the bar as I spoke to the monster. How could a man be like... How could a monster... How could anything just be like this? And? He asked. The killing of the pets, I continued. Will winced slightly. Did I? Oh, yeah, the dog. Yeah, I remember the dog. Benji, wasn't it? Fucking Benji. He raised the glass in salute to Benji as though it was a fond memory. Perhaps it was. I felt something unpleasant twist in my stomach. And you left the father alive to watch all this? I told him. Will smiled faintly. Yes. Why? I asked him. Why did I leave the father alive? No, old chap. Why did you do what you did? Just murdered innocent people. I don't want to know why you left the father alive. My imagination can fill in that blank for me. The ultimate cruelty committed, in my opinion. He smiled as though the mention of this cruelty was a compliment of sorts. Why did I murder that family? He asked, then thought about it for a moment. Then he said something which could have been amusing under other circumstances, but was so cold that I had difficulty just... This was just bloody difficulty. There was no television in the hotel you guys made me stay at. Another whimsical shrug. I stared at him. Now bloody television, I said. I was incredulous. Yeah. You tortured an entire family because you were bored? Will tilted his head. Well, Monty. He looked me in the eyes, and those eyes of his were dead of emotion. When you say it like that, it does sound quite, I don't know, dramatic. What? Bloody children, Will! I know what children are, he replied, releasing me from his stare. Animals! I continued. Yes, yeah. The cat was particularly aggressive, actually. Yeah, fucking Tiddles and Benji. He laughed.
I hate fucking cats.
Entered my brain from Fenrir the Woolsale. I closed my eyes briefly. There are moments in life when one hopes, quite desperately, that the person across from you is joking. Will was not doing that, was he? What? No, he was not joking. Do you understand what you actually did, old chap? I asked. Oh, yeah. And how, I asked slowly, do you rationalize it? Will took another sip of beer. Then he looked at me and gave me a broadside of a smile. I was really, really bored. Fenrir laughed. I looked at the whiskey glass on the bar and stared at it for a long moment before landing my gaze on the man. Good Lord, I muttered. Revulsion shook through me. Will raised his pint to making sure I get a room with a telly. I wanted to. Then my heart sank as I realized there was nothing I could do, and concluded two things. First, that the professor had been entirely correct about Will being catastrophically dangerous. Second, well, I have no second point. I felt powerless. One rarely feels powerless. Rarely, but in this case I truly was. I had to remember that the man was not a man, and not even a monster. He was other. That technically he was a tool for doing the very work that others could not and would not do. My mobile phone, telephone thingy, did one of those pings with one of those text notification whatsits. I lifted it and okayed it while retrieving my spectacles from my lapel pocket of my jacket. Okay. Peterson's here with a car to take us to Simon's, I told the utter fucking bastard.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.